Hello to everyone who's watching this. I am Rupinder and I work with Shakti Shalini. And today with me, I have Ms. Nandita Baruah, who is the Asia Foundation's country representative for India. She has over 25 years of experience working in the development sector in Asia. She has served in Nepal, Cambodia, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, and has provided technical support to programs in Mongolia, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and Thailand, among others. She has worked with multilateral and bilateral agencies such as USAID, UNODC, UN Women, and CIDA on national and regional programs addressing gender equality, urban governance, migration and mobility, human trafficking, judicial sector reforms, and human rights. So welcome, Nandita. Thank you for being here. And we have with us Dr. Achal Bhagat, who is a senior consultant psychiatrist and psychotherapist with Indraprastha Apollo Hospitals in New Delhi. And he's the chairperson of Sarthak, which is a group of mental health organizations, and ADI, which works on issues of disability. So thanks to the both of you. Thank you for joining us today. Today we will be discussing, we'll be talking about domestic violence within relationships, within relations of domesticity and intimacy, and what it means to feel safe in relationships, be it with your partner, intimate partner, or even with your family members, etc. We will try to also understand what it means to have boundaries or ground rules in relationships, among other related issues and topics. So I will quickly talk about that this discussion is part of Shakti Shalini's 1-month campaign against domestic violence, which is part of Avon India's campaign called Isolate and Not Alone. So the initiative is to make individuals aware of what domestic violence is, because there is a wide misconception that domestic violence or domestic abuse is limited to physical or sexual abuse. But there are different forms that we will be discussing throughout these 4 weeks. So please stay tuned. And we will also look at the impact of domestic abuse on survivors as well as other members of families, etc. And we will look at crisis intervention and support services that we as an organization also offer. So let's just get into it. So I'll start with the first question. If we can talk about how do you define as domestic violence? There are so many definitions. There are multiple ways where people talk about domestic violence as only within intimate relationships, etc. So if you could, Achal or Nandita.
Sure. Shall I go first? Is that okay? Yeah. As I think you rightly said, Pinder, is that it's not a singular way that domestic violence occurs, right? And it's also the definition of violence. The first thing is when you say domestic violence, it's a violence that's occurring in what you would define as the domestic space.
Right.
And it is violence perpetuated by an individual or set of individual on another person. And it's not necessarily physical, there are all forms of it, and I'm sure Achal will go into it as well. But it could include anything from what we could describe as simple neglect, not giving access to even basic necessities, for example, within a family. If it is against, one, say, a member of the family, a female member of the family, where you deny the female member access to healthcare when you know she needs it, or you knowingly deny the female member access to food or nutrition, or access or to mobility, to step out of the house, access to education, simply because you feel that that right is not deserved by the person. All of that would fall under the purview of what you would look at as domestic violence. There's also psychological violence, where you undermine a person's identity, individuality, force the person to do things that he or she is not interested or inclined to do, whether it's something very simple as forcing the person to forcefully enter into a relationship or marriage, to something more serious as forcing the person into certain acts of sexual abuse or violence. So the spectrum is large, but if it is within the domestic sphere, it doesn't necessarily have to be with just intimate partners, as we call it.
Right.
Because intimate partner violence can occur outside of the domestic space as well.
That's true.
You don't have to be in a domesticity kind of a relationship, but it could be with amongst other family members, brothers, sisters, of course, husband, wife, brothers, sometimes brothers and brothers. It's also not necessarily a completely gendered form of violence. A particular male member showing certain aggressive behavior against another male member because of his age, sexuality, mental orientation, any of it. Occurring within that space would be something that I'd look at as domestic violence. Achal, over to you to explain.
Sure. I thank you, Nandita. I think it's extremely important, that one, we are saying that there are multiple definitions. Second, we are saying that it is not just a husband-wife issue. It is an issue in relationships within a space when people are living together in a domestic space. And sometimes this space is very broad. You might be living away from your family, yet because you are a part of a family, the violence that is occurring within that space might still be affecting you. So across migration as well, the violence could continue. Across generations, the violence could continue, and within the generation, it could happen across genders as well. It need not be towards, it's not always true that it's men versus women. So although the laws define it differently, but the way we experience it in an everyday manner, it is a significant and a broad issue that affects everyone, adults, children, elders, people with disability, people with mental health problems, women definitely, and men too. Men are not always the perpetrators. Men can be sometimes the survivors of violence as well. But to structure this, probably what would be useful is to I would look at it from a mental health lens through this conversation. And I want to bring in 4 words that that I definitely look at as the impact of. So violence is what the person who's experiencing it qualifies as violence, right? There's no particular act, there is no particular definition that will go against. If I am feeling violated or hurt or traumatized, then it is my definition of violence that is true. That's the first definition of violence. The second is that, so if you were to still, make it more objective, if a person's dignity is affected, if the person's sense of participation and togetherness is affected, especially participation in decision making regarding their own life is affected. If person's control over their own life and the events of their life is affected through stopping stopping them from meeting friends, stopping them from meeting children, looking after children, stopping them from meeting their parents, decreasing access, if control is taken away, if access to healthcare is denied, for example, that is violence. If decision making regarding what you use for your personal hygiene is determined by somebody else's budgeting, or you have to account for the money for your personal hygiene products, then that's violence. If somebody's control over their own life is affected, and of course, if they are stopped from having a purposeful life, and that's violence. Or if they are forced into something that they do not want to be the purpose of their life, and that is made the sole objective of what they are doing, or whatever they are doing is criticized all the time and not acknowledged all the time, that's violence as well. So a loss of dignity, loss of togetherness, loss of participation, loss of control, and a loss of purpose. All this, when that happens makes a mental health definition of violence.
Right. Right. Um, and also, I mean, the person who's facing the abuse, etc., and the ones who are also witnessing it, I think for them to, if that is also, I mean, they go through that trauma too, right? So that is witnessing too is a form of violence. We look at it.
I think so. I think being violent is a part of violence as well. I think if you're a human being and you are being violent, you're also being violent towards yourself. You don't realize that. You realize that over a period of time, you will change as a person if you're being violent, and you will stop recognizing yourself as the way you were. So if I were to, when I work with perpetrators, I remind them that how they became perpetrators was that it was a process of violence that also affected them, and that's how they became perpetrators. Not only in the eyes of others, but perpetrators in the eyes of themselves. So violence affects everybody. Violence does not leave anybody untouched.
Right. Right. So basically, so there's some form of control or a way to manipulate the other person or an individual. That's why such acts are, performed in a way. So we're going to talk about power here, and power in such like every relationship has power. There's some power dynamic in every sort of relationship, and there's some. I mean, if you can define it as a healthy power dynamic or an unhealthy one. So if we could talk about that. How is it linked? How is power linked? Like this way of controlling. It shouldn't be control. Power should not be about control, but that's what people look at it as, that it's control. If you're saying power, then of course controlling the other person. But is that true or no?
I think Rupinder, just taking from what Achal said in terms of if you look at violence, what it does is it takes away your agency, right? It takes away your dignity, as you said. Now, the person who is perpetrating the violence on the other is using some kind of an power equation. And at that particular point, he or she is feeling more powerful vis-a-vis the person, and therefore is able to undermine the other person, therefore is able to coerce, force.
Right.
That the reason that the power vests in the person could be for a variety of reasons. Sometimes, of course, it's a socially determined, power, agency of power that's given. So a father is socially determined, supposedly more powerful than the rest of the members in the family. And if that's ingrained in the minds of the father of a family, he or she, it will depend on how he then uses that power, right, as the father, whether he uses it in a productive way, or is power, the way it's defined currently, is something that's only becomes powerful when it negates another person. That's the problem.
Right.
You look at power as being, vested on you, and it makes you feel only powerful when you negate somebody. That's where the problem occurs. Power by itself, and so how you, as you said, how you play out power in your relationship. Is it something that you think that why is it that being soft, being caring is not perceived as power? Why is it that in our systems we only look at aggression and loudness as being power?
Yeah.
How we have defined and vested power that makes it come out as a violent manifestation. To me, I think it's very important to redefine power and reclaim what you call power. Yeah, and to say that being caring, being soft-spoken, being accommodating are actually signs of power and not weakness, right? So I think that definition of how power is currently defined and how therefore it is vested and how it gets played out makes it a very problematic, system, a way of or actionable. The way it's acted upon makes it very problematic, because you're never powerful unless you have undermined somebody. You are only powerful if you're number one. So you always have to be number one, and at whatever cost that you reach the top. Now that's not just related to violence. It's also related to the way we lead our lives. In institutions, the way we define leadership, the way we define control as being at the cost of disenfranchising somebody else, rather than control being a positive way of being able to give equal access. We never define control that way. So I think all of this whole equation of power and power dynamics And the way it gets defined and vested on people is something which is very problematic. And I think that any organization, institutions, individuals working on issues of equality and violence really need to start reframing the definition of what is power and start injecting that into the discourse. Because I think, and Achal, you probably would agree and would take it from there, is that impact then it has on your own mental health when you only see yourself to be powerful when you disenfranchise somebody or when you undermine somebody. So at any point where you feel you're not able to do that, you feel powerless, right? So if I'm not able to control somebody, then I feel powerless. Rather than saying that's not a sense of powerlessness. Controlling somebody probably is a sense of loss of your own, dignity, or your own loss of control over your own self in one way.
Sure.
So I think that's, to me, how do we then work on this by revisiting these definitions and looking at, as Achal said, how do you then work with the perpetrators and men who perceive power in a particular way? And women who imbibe it in certain ways. How do you work with that becomes the question, Achal.
Sure. Too many questions. I want to take the conversation in two directions, and I'll try and take them in both these directions parallelly. One is that what you said about power and inequity. If power leads to inequity, then power is likely to lead to violence. But also the way power is couched. Normally, power is couched in the terms of protection. So the typical example would be that men have to protect women. Women cannot go out at night. Men are the brothers who have to protect the sisters. Men are the people who have to protect the honor of a family. So power gets linked to protection significantly. And the moment you get the rights as a protector, you also get the rights to violate. It flows from there. The violation flows from the right to protection. And that transition is so gradual and so seamless that even men don't realize that they've made the transition from being a protector to a violator that easily, or anybody. I mean, I'm again focusing on men because mostly in the social contract, it's the patriarchal system that becomes the most visible social reality, and that's why I'm focusing on this men and women kind of story. But it could be any protector versus any person. But the same man, and now I'm going to take it back to inequity. The same man who is powerful and the protector at home, and also probably the perpetrator of violence at home, the same man is facing the same inequity outside. He's being othered outside. He's being, his rights are being taken away by people who are even more, powerful than him. He is facing violence outside the home as well. And he's bringing that experience of helplessness back to his home and then converting that into an experience of power. And that experience of power is then converting itself into violence. So, and that's why when you try to understand the roots of violence in a society, they can't always be understood within the confines of a home, because the home is not an island in itself. The home lies within a society which is inequitable, where equality is and protection are defined in a certain manner. So I think power is about control, and we need to redefine it. But how do we create opportunities for power to be shared in almost like a tennis game, or a cricket game? You have one innings, I have one innings. We play, and at the end of the day, sometimes it's your decision, sometimes it's my decision. But when it's my life, it is my decision. When it's my innings, it's my decision. And I do not get stopped from taking those decisions as long as I am not violent or abusive. So if all people were to respect each other and share this role of taking decisions, and I think participation in decision making is a significant way. Equal access is a significant way of decreasing the chances of power becoming violence.
But also, I mean, just a quick question there that, once you're in the position of power, you've been given the title of a protector. Since you know that you are the protector, there's less room for vulnerability or for you to come out with, show your own weakness, or just be like, I'm tired of doing this, I'm just tired of being in this position that's been kind of given to me in a way. So I think that also, does that also lead to, I mean, of course it leads to frustrations, etc., and they don't know, how to channelize or probably communicate what is it that they're feeling, and maybe that would lead to
the precaution that we have to take is that we don't make it they. All of us feel similarly in many ways. Most times all of us feel vulnerable, all of us feel the need to be powerful, all of us have used power with aggression. Right. So that violence as a phenomena, as a psychological phenomena, is universal. It's not a psychological phenomena which is only reserved for a few people who are violators. All of us have the potential of being violent, and but we have to curb that the risk, the vulnerability that we bring with us. Just like, this is an example I have used for many years, and Nandita has heard this in our conversations. We all burp, but on this Zoom call, none of us will burp. We will curb ourselves.
Yeah.
Similarly, all of us can be violent. You have to learn to curb yourself.
Right.
You have to put the boundaries there for yourself.
And I think what is important, as Achal is also pointing out, is that, how do you reclaim, even for yourself, the ability to control your behavior, whereby that control that you're putting on yourself is not something you perceive as your own weakness. Therefore you say that, yes, controlling my behavior to be violent or to hit out, and not showing the person his or her place, that's not a sign of weakness. That's actually a sign of strength in being able to do that. And therefore not undermine the space, the identity, and the equity of the other, whoever that other is. And I think those discussions and the work on this requires much more kind of a deep dive investment from organizations beyond those who are just working on violence against women or with women's organizations. And that's been the problem. A lot of the problem has also been that anything that's got to do with violence is largely being invested on either violence against women organization or with organizations working on mental health with perpetrators or people like Achal, you guys. My thing is that this is across the board. This is in any community program that you are doing. Even when you're sitting in a community group and you're trying to take decisions on something probably as simple as where should the well be dug in a village, violence and power comes out to play, unless you take cognizance of that and inculcate and inject those discussions and discourses with this definition that we just talked about of being, of being in control of yourself in a way not to undermine the other at every level of work that you're in is important, even as leaders of institution, So it's very interesting. We talk about institutions who work on violence, but then when we look at how leadership gets defined in those institutions, I would say those are very, power hierarchical, and by that very definition, violative.
That's true. Achal sir, do you have something to add to that?
I think so. I think that another thought was coming to me. In the work that we did together with CII when we were working on the organizations, and we heard the stories of women managers hitting a glass ceiling and violence at workplace that they were facing, the lack of opportunity or lack of equity. those women and men go back home, and those women and so you can't have a different value framework at work, and you can't have a different value framework in society. And I was also thinking of the caste discussions, or the other discussions that are prominent nowadays. So you cannot have the othering as a norm at one level, and not use othering as a phenomena at home. So there's this normalization of othering that is happening, which has been happening for centuries. It's not today that it is happening, but it is more talked about it under this word today. But so I'm saying that in a society where inequity exists as a norm, inequity and violence will exist in homes as well. And so to address it, you cannot just address it with a helpline. To prevent it, you have to address it through education. You have to address it through working with boys and men. You have to address it through working with the panchayats. You have to address it with working with legislators and religious leaders. You have to address it through a multitude of interventions. And then too, not much will change. Yet one has to create conversations. And the conversations, again, have to start at home. You can't wait for the world to change what is happening in your family, in your home. So the conversations, when they start at home, and if they only start about violence and power, then they would become aggressive again, because it will be dichotomous. It will be us versus them kind of a conversations. What is required is conversations in general to start. Views to be heard about various things. Then only would views about misuse of power at home will be heard, or sharing of power at home will be heard. My friend Shekhar Sheshadri says this, you can't have conversations about sex education with children or sexual abuse with children without having a conversation with them about Doraemon, or without having a conversation with them about trees or plants or toys. You have to have conversations about everything, and then probably you can have a conversation about difficult things as well.
Right. And also I think it's, we were talking about sharing power, right, in families and relationships. And I think it's also giving away that power seems hard for people. Giving away some sort of authority also, it doesn't sit easy or well with individuals. So that too can be.
Lots invested in being powerful, isn't it? I mean, from the childhood, a person has been told that you have, for example, my mother told me that I had to become a doctor when I was in class 2. So I would do my damnedest to become a doctor then for the rest of my life. So I don't know whether I actually wanted to be a doctor or not, but it is a template that has been set in. And the template of being a man and the template of being powerful, a lot is emotionally invested in that. So to give up that emotional investment is difficult.
Right. That is true. Ma'am, anything, or should I move on? We have a bunch of things to. Okay. Right. So wanted to understand safety in relationships. It's not just, I mean, of course, physically, emotionally, and psychologically, what does it mean to feel safe in a relationship? Not just with your intimate partner, but with other members of your family or even friends. So what does it mean for one to feel safe or secure?
I think, look, this is something from the beginning of this conversation, right? If you feel that you're validated, if you feel that you have agency in everything that relates to your own life, as long as it's not something that is relating to self-harm, right? If you have agency on things that are progressive, positive, that is giving you meaning, making you happy, fulfilling your wishes and desires in a positive way, that's when you feel safe and secure, irrespective of what that relationship is, whether it's with your father or a spouse or a brother. The moment you feel that your space and your agency is being curbed by somebody else, you start questioning your own identity vis-a-vis that relationship, right? So if as a sister, my identity is being stopped to the point where I'm saying, you're only going to go to this school and not that school, and my agency gets stopped. And then I start questioning my identity, as start thinking, is it because I'm less capable of making a choice? So doubts start creeping into your head about decisions you can take or can't take, the validity of your own decision. Yeah. And that takes away your safety. Your ability to navigate life after that becomes challenging, from very small things of being told what you would wear specifically to where you would go, are things that constantly chip away at your sense of safety and well-being, and then gets manifested in insecurities and inability to take decision, which then gets turned around by the other to say, anyway, you're not capable, so I need to take care of you. Other relationships you navigate. So from being a sister and a daughter, you get to becoming a wife or a partner. That sense of your being stopped at various points of your life from taking simple decisions chipped away your ability to feel safe and secure. And it in turn made you start questioning your own identity and agency. And therefore it defines the future relationship, which continues to be maybe more violated. And the inability to regain that sense and space becomes challenging. So I think safety, the first ethics of safety is for any person to feel that irrespective of what your gender, your sexual identity, your orientation, your physical ability or disability, irrespective of all of that, the space to make choices about your own life, from the smallest one to the biggest one, defines your sense of safety. When you don't have those, it chips away at your sense of safety.
Right. Achal sir, yeah.
So 4 words again, I think in categories, although they flow over each other: care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge. Right. When you're not cared for, or you don't have access to resources for care, and you're neglected, your needs are neglected. When people do not want to know you as a person, and as a person, let me bring in the concept of everybody has multiple identities, right? When you're boxed into one identity, right? So for example, you introduced me as a psychiatrist, as a psychotherapist, you told my affiliation organizations, but I have other identities beyond being a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist. I am a fat man with white hair who loves Golgappas, who, probably likes to listen to ghazals and sings along with them in a completely tuneless manner. That's an identity that I have. And those identities, the reason I'm mentioning that there are multiple identities is that if people box you in a particular identity and think that they know you, and then behave with you according to that perceived identity that they have, built for you, that's probably the most violative thing that can happen to a person. The inability to express all your identities without fear is important, and that goes across orientation, that goes across belief, faith, that goes across many things, because you get boxed in. So care, knowledge, respect, and responsibility. If you don't get what is the most important respect that people? Respect for dignity, and again, where does that flow from? As I said, respect from dignity flows from participation, and respect from dignity flows from privacy. While you have the right to have knowledge of me, you do not have the right of knowledge of me without my consent.
Hmm.
So do get to know me, but not without my consent. And that lack of consent is lack of respect, and that's violated. And then responsibility. I have certain needs and rights, and so I have to negotiate those needs and rights with people I'm living with, and so I have to behave responsibly towards them, and they have to behave responsibly towards me. Now, if all this is then put into the concept of boundaries in a home, if the boundaries are too diffuse, then all these four things are challenged. If anybody can walk in and out, if anybody can get to know, if people know your passwords, if everybody knows each other's passwords, if people don't give you, so if the boundaries are too diffuse, then safety is challenged. If the boundaries are too rigid, then safety is challenged. So I know we are talking about many complex layers of thought here, but let's stay with one: respect and respect and responsibility, and multiple, acceptance of multiple identities of each other. If we are able to create this environment, it is a safe environment. It is not about good touch and bad touch, learning about that. The smallest of child knows about good touch and bad touch. The youngest of children I've met know about good touch and bad touch. It's in an environment people imbibe it. It is about knowing that you would be allowed, or you have the space to make your own decisions. But also, space to make your own decisions does not mean that you have not learned negotiation and resolution of conflict. Because if your growing up does not teach you, or if your lived experience does not teach you negotiation and conflict resolution, then it is quite possible that you might end up either being violative or face violence. Because you have to walk away from conflict as a part of conflict resolution as well. And I'm not putting the responsibility on the victim to protect themselves. I'm saying, when we're looking at solutions, the system, the family system needs to create these solutions. And one of the greatest values that people can learn from each other are respect of each other's identities, respect for privacy, and skills that they can learn is skills to communicate, skills to resolve conflict, and skills to negotiate with each other.
But like you said, that if an individual is boxed, or somebody creates a customized version of you because you've lived according to certain rules and regulations in maybe your household or relationships, there is a loss of identity. Like, you don't know yourself. You struggle with knowing who you are. And if you go on in life, and if you are to build more relationships in life, how will you then create your boundaries when probably you've never had any? Probably nobody allowed you to create them, or tell you that, okay, it's like you said, there's certain rigid boundaries as well. Somebody might call you, okay, that's stuck up behavior or something like that. So how will one set these boundaries for themselves, or in the relationships that they get into, be with family members or partners, or even in general, to be honest?
I'm just going to take a stab at this, and then I'm sure Achal would like to add to it. I think one of the things, which is what I was trying to say also in the beginning, and I think Achal kind of elaborated on that, is that there are certain socially defined normative behavior which are subscribed, right? So within patriarchy, right? Now, if you play those out in a way that you actually believe that controlling one person or ensuring that you have greater authority versus the rest of the people in your family or in the relationship that you're in, you will end up in a way where from a very young age, you will make certain members of your family or your community believe that they are less capable. It also works reverse. Like if somebody tells you, like Achal was saying, that from the age of 2 you have to be a doctor, you believe in the fact that you need to be a doctor and you'll try to be a doctor. Now, if somebody tells you that, you're a secondary citizen or you're a secondary person in the family, you're less important because you're a woman, for example, or that, your brother has a greater say in the household than you do, your tendency to imbibe that internally is very high. And therefore, your ability to therefore negotiate that fact that you are not a lesser person or a lesser being is further reduced. And I think that as Achal is saying, this is something that requires work at every level. We cannot wait to help people. Of course, I mean, that doesn't mean that you don't help people negotiate when they've reached a situation in their life where they are completely cornered or, to the point they're completely violated. But this is a conversation that has to happen way before, with men and boys, women and girls, community members, about what is it that is required most when we interact with another human being, in a way that we provide the equal space and respect for the other, because doing that actually enhances your own capacities and your own identity to a higher level from being a baser, more controlling person, which is being done at the cost of the other. So telling a perpetrator to say that you became a perpetrator because you didn't control, yeah, right? You've come to this point where you are now today looking at yourself and seeking help and saying I'm a perpetrator, but there was a process that went into you becoming that, because you didn't question some of your own self. And you don't question for a variety of reasons. Sometimes you don't know when to question because you believe that's the accepted behavior, because everybody around you is doing that, right? And society is actually endorsing you for behaving in a particular way towards the other, towards a brother who is, whose sexuality is differently oriented, towards your sister who may have fallen in love with somebody you didn't think she should fall in love with. So so your violence, your aggression in such situations are actually lauded, right? Till the point you then you kind of imbibe it so deeply that you think that's how you need to behave and you need to control others. So I think the conversation needs to happen on what is prescribed behavior in society, and why is prescribed behavior hierarchical? Why do some people have more control, more access, just by virtue of who they are versus others? Yeah, it's even at that societal level. Why is it that a son has, elder son should have more say in family matters versus
right.
no? And unless you question it at that. And I think when we say working with men and boys, and I think, we've kind of been working on it quite a bit, it's also, to me, the question of power also actually comes down to that whole issue of how are we defining and living masculinities? What is the definition of masculinity by which we are prescribing for men to live with? And when I say men, masculinity is not just for cis men, right? That gets played out in how you then look at gay men, lesbian women, other transgender men, women. So the way masculinity gets prescribed and proscribed, and then way that gets linked to power, is something that is problematic in the current scenario. And unless we start unpacking those and looking at saying, okay, is there another way of defining? And it's almost like, I don't like to, I know that a lot of people use the word reconstructing, redefining, but I don't think so. I just think that we just need to me, it's more to unpack it and to see whether the current definition of what's masculine, and masculine behavior also gets imbibed onto women, and they'll turn around and say, oh, she's such a masculine woman.
That's true. Yep.
Why? Because she's imbibing certain prescribed behavior, which is linked to men, and behaving in a particular way. To me, it's important to unpack that and say, is that really a positive way of life? Does that undermine you as a human being, or does that actually gives you a more refined sense of being a person? What does it do to you when you live with those prescribed norms? And questioning that becomes important to also then questioning how that gets played out in relation to aggression, violence, control, power, all of it. So I think some of these conversations, some of the work that we are engaged in the field, level, or in our in the development sector, or even broadly in just the socio-political sectors, they really need to be rejigged a lot more, and I think words have a very strong way of reinforcing behavior, because
Right.
moment you say masculine, what comes into your mind? Unless we reinvent and say, well, masculine can also be, masculine needs to be defined something as being nurturing, caring. Why are those just feminine traits, for example? Um, do you become less of a man if you have those traits? And so questioning those, from whether it's a program at the school level, whether it's in the education system, whether it's in the community level, it's also very interesting that I think those conversations are coming out. The other day, I met a group which looked at, and they came to us with an interesting concept about feminist foreign policy. And I thought for a minute, I was like, yeah, wait a minute, wow, this is interesting. But it actually then made me think about how a lot of the power politics gets played out in the real world of statehood, nationhood, powerful nation versus a weak nation, powerful
Right.
leader versus a weak leader, so I have been thinking, and I'm thinking, the work on violence against women, or violence in general, requires a much larger breadth of discussions and interventions beyond just the realm of working with rights group or women's group. I think it needs to be expanded. I'm kind of thinking about, and Achal, I don't know how this will pan out, but feminist foreign policy is interesting, and I still haven't wrapped my head around it. But there probably is a way of looking at it and saying that, okay, this basically defines the relationship of one nation with another. So a powerful nation versus a less powerful nation, or who is a powerful nation, and why is somebody less powerful or less endowed, I think a lot of that, the larger picture flows from the micro level picture at the home, and how we then get to where we are as leaders.
So, and to add to that, it's our various relationships that we're talking about. So if we were to again look at our relationship with nature, for example, and our need to assert ourselves as a race, as a species on nature, isn't there? That's where violence is beginning from. I mean, so there's a need to fundamentally question ourselves. And again, while it has to be a journey that society does, that a nation does, that the world does, it also has to be a journey that each individual does, without getting paralyzed. You see, I'm not saying everybody should now start sitting on the banyan tree and start contemplating about the question whether they are violent or not. I'm saying in your everyday interactions, if you start questioning yourself and say, okay, is what I am doing going to take away something from someone else? And could I do it differently so that it creates more a sense of equality? And that question, that reflective question, even if you did it for a month, it will internalize a process of asking yourself whether my actions can be violent or not. And those are simple tools that one can use, simple tools of reflection that one can use. And the answers then start flowing. The difficulty is when you get to recognize that there is a risk that you bring onto the table because of your templates that you have acquired over a period of time. The difficulty begins then. How do you challenge that template?
Mm-hmm.
And why would you do that? As I said, there's a huge payoff. You are preserving that template because there is a huge payoff. Now, to be able to, how do you incentivize yourself to not carry that template? And there the bigger question comes in. As a human being, do I become a better human being by carrying this template? Or do I become a lesser human being by carrying this template? And if the evidence is that you're not becoming a better human being by carrying this template, then there's a need to challenge it. Now, given that we live in a transactional world where you have to survive every day, the bigger question of your identity as a human being is a difficult question for people to focus on. But even if some people started doing it, it would be a good beginning.
That's one practice that I guess we all need to bring in, because we have our set templates, and there's room for editing a bit of it, but we don't know how to kind of, I mean, most of us are not even questioning our templates. So I think that's an important point there, that we need to kind of look at it and figure. Nandita, anything you'd like to add to?
No.
All right. So I mean, in a way, we've brought up boundaries and etc. And now I just wanted to understand that if in a particular relationship there is a violation of the set ground rules or boundaries, so how does one negotiate that? How does one like bring it up? And because boundaries is, even if they're set, I think since we are constantly changing our boundaries, often we recreate them. It's not just that, okay, there's a set boundary and it's going to be there forever. So how does one negotiate in case
I think,
of violation?
Rupinder, the first step, of course, is for the person to recognize that the boundary has been transgressed,
Right.
And to know what that transgression has done to them, to the individual. And that itself is a hard step, right? Because you don't even realize that your boundaries have been transgressed in most cases because you haven't set them. But if you have set them, in a situation, and let's assume that in a relationship, certain boundaries were set and they were transgressed. To me, the first step is always to try and see this space to negotiate with the other who has transgressed it, right? How much space is there, and who is the transgressor? How much control power? For most people in the world, it's very difficult to analyze these things at a point when you are being violated.
Right.
It takes a while till you get there. And while I do think a lot of people may try to, start the negotiation by themselves, most of the time they do require help by others. So I also believe that people who are witness to the transgression of boundaries, who are witness to violations, whether they are your family or your friends, they have a role to play in facilitating support. It's a very interesting thing that in our it's their personal mamla.
Yeah.
Don't get it.
Yeah.
You are actually then a party to the play. For saying that, right? And how you do that would vary depending on how much space you have with that individual or the set of individuals to be able to do that. And I think while retaliating violence is never an answer. It never gets you anywhere, even when it's with the same gender, or with two different genders. But first step would be to try and reason and negotiate, if that is possible, to seek help. For others who are witness to it, to be able to play a role is critical. You can't really always access a service provider at any whichever time. So there has to be a community that we have to invest in, who can work to facilitate negotiations of boundaries. Whether it's the community is starting from your home, within your family, friend circle, workspace. And that would require more work than we have put in so far, I think. It will require much more deeper engagements and conversations with a cross-section of people, and with lenses which are not just gendered, but which are also looking at age, ability, caste, class, all of that, right? Because transgressions of boundaries don't just are not just limited to relationship between two genders, though it's maximum within a male-female relationship because of patriarchy. It also happens within children and their parents.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's a lot of those, and I do think that we probably have to work a lot more on how extensively we engage and prepare communities, the communities that we exist in, that we live in, um, to become a party to this process of, you know, addressing any transgression that you see around you. And I think for me, it's also the ability of an individual and putting the entire onus on the victim or who's facing the transgression to say that, oh, but why did you not speak up, or why did you, it's not a fair
That's not a fair question. No,
it's not a fair thing to do, because clearly the person has arrived at that space through a journey of life and through certain lived experiences, which has made it difficult for him or her to be able to question it. And those lived experience may not be just related to this one person who is the violator. It's the society, the community, the family, the friends, who may have all contributed to undermining this person's ability to even question or negotiate what was happening. In smaller levels, still it becomes very big. Yeah. And most of the time, I think we ignore smaller violations. We tend to ignore. We have this thing of, theek ho jayega, or it's not a big deal. I know that, I think, Achal, you'll remember many years ago, we were doing a program with judiciary in South Asia, and we did a research with, you know, very, very senior appellate court judges across South Asia, and a large percentage, I think it was 60+% of judges from the appellate court across South Asia who responded by saying, you know, an occasional slap is not a violence. You know, so that was the response. They said, you know, ek thappad hai, it's not violence. You know, unfortunately, even a law says it defines violence and you know, repercussions on intensity. You know, if it's a slap, it's okay, sulah kar lo. You know, if it's life-threatening, and by the way, you know, let's talk about life-threatening. Is it just that you're going to die, or it's life-threatening where your identity has been negated to the point that you don't believe you exist anymore? You don't have to be physically dead. Yeah,
that's true.
So it's all of that, and it's amazing that how we can trivialize or even categorize violence by saying ye chota violence hai, ye bada violence. Violence is violence. There is no chota bada in it. It's a transgression. You know, it's taking control over somebody's life. It's undermining a person. It's violation. You know, we need to learn to also say that more loudly and more unequivocally, saying there is no small or big violence. The impact of it may vary, but no act, to me at least, I feel that there's nothing which is a small or a big violence.
Right. I completely agree. I remember that conversation in that hall in probably Ranchi or somewhere, that we were having this conversation with a district judge saying something like that. But I think solutions have to be multifold and multi-layered. A society has to provide for safe spaces, first response system, and which can be reached out to at any point of time, and which is neutral and which does not push you back into the system of violence, into the cycle of violence, which does not normalize the behavior of violence, which accepts that if you've taken a decision to reach out, you should not be judged and you should not be blamed, and the solution should not be put back onto you to somehow make peace. So the systemic response has to be strong enough, and it has to be non-judgmental, neutral, and non-blaming of the victim. But it also has to not look at the victim as always the victim. It does not have to add to their helplessness by looking at them through this lens of victimhood only. Because if the system that supports you looks at you with the eye, with the lens of victimhood, then you start believing that you can't ever be anybody else. Then you only acquire that one single identity of being the victim. So there has to be a systemic response. There has to be a preventive systemic response, which we've already talked about in education and corporates. There has to be how does the individual respond themselves? The first thing is not to blame yourself for the act of violence of others. The second thing is to say to yourself that there's a cycle of violence. The person who perpetrates the violence recognizes that he's been violent, recognizes the impact on the other person, and actually apologizes in the next few hours or few days, and promises not to be violent again, or promises not to repeat it again. And then once a few days have passed, there's a period where things seem to be normal, where things actually seem to be better than normal. And then there's a setup that starts happening where the other person, the person who's been violated, again starts experiencing a diminishing of themselves and a breach of boundaries. And over a period of time, the setup is complete. And then a reason comes forth where the other person is blamed again for the perpetrator being violent again, right? So तुमने मेरी माँ का खाना ठीक नहीं बनाया था scenario. तुम इतना भी ध्यान नहीं रख सकती हो scenario, right? So you get blamed again, and you then face violence again, and again you say, oh, what the hell has happened to me? Why didn't I address this the first time around? Why did I fall into this trap? And you start blaming yourself. Now, this cycle of violence has to be broken. Whilst single events can also be extremely traumatic, and I'm not distinguishing between them being lesser or a pattern of violence being more traumatic, but the pattern is more difficult to get out of. Because once you're sucked into that pattern, then you have to figure out, how do you break this cycle? And the first thing to break the cycle is to talk about it. And not just talk about it with yourself, talk about it with somebody who is non-judgmental, somebody whom you trust, somebody who will then not get into a transactional relationship with you just because you're talking about it. Because you could be exploited in the process of talking about you being vulnerable, right? So it has to be somebody whom you trust and somebody who will not expect something back from you just because you're talking about your vulnerability. And once you've found that person, and there are many people around you who could be that person, schoolmates, family, sometimes you will be told, oh, aisa to hota hai. Somebody will try and normalize this violence. Now, when somebody tries to normalize this violence, recognize this normalization as a societal response to violence, and don't normalize it for yourself. Keep on looking for another person who would validate that you've experienced violence, and you need a response to it. Now, that response need not always be adversarial. That response need not always be retributive. Usne mere ko kiya to main dikha दूं. It need not always be retributive or adversarial. But it need not also be accepting and letting go of it. Acceptance has to be that violence has been there, and this needs to stop because I'm a human being and I have a right not to be violated. And this is what my expectation is. And if this person cannot meet that expectation, then the boundary in the relationship has to be established. And here the boundary has to be a firm boundary. And to establish that boundary, if I need to move out of the relationship, I need to move out of the relationship. But adversarial responses or retributive responses do not lead to solution. You see, what happens is that, again, going back to a heterosexual man-woman relationship, women, unfortunately, the response systems, for example, the 498A or the PWDB Act, unfortunately, sometimes other men use those systems to create situations where women again are in, it's a no-win situation, it's a double bind. The response system is violative, the perpetrator is violative, the woman then continues to remain in a status quo. And you can expand it to other genders and other relationships as well. The status quo is maintained because there is no response system that validates you or does not exploit you. So we as people who are the response system, sometimes we have to recognize that our systems are not retributive. They're not forcing the person back into a relationship if they don't want to go back into a relationship. They are safe spaces for people to stay away from the relationship. They are safe spaces to negotiate from. And if the negotiation is going to happen, what are the ground rules in that negotiation? And what is accepted and what is not accepted? So it is again not a day's task. It is a process. It is not an event. It will not ever be completed in my lifetime, probably not in another few lifetimes, but it's a process of evolving systems that are validating and not forcing people back into violent situations.
Right. Nandita ma'am, if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think as Achal rightly said, I think it's about being able to reclaim your own identity and self, and there could be various ways in which you do that, right? Whether you
Right.
seek help, whether you look at the community around you, support system around you, but at no time or at no point should one absolutely be clear that you do not, if you have felt violated, you do not buy into the societal rhetoric of it being a normal situation or a normal condition. The moment we normalize that for ourselves, because that's what we hear most societies say, we open ourselves up to a much higher and continued level of violence. And I think it's important to tell people that and recognize that messaging.
Right, and I mean, coming to that, and it's coming to the last segment as well. It's once one recognizes that they've faced violence or they faced abuse all these years, or all this while, and they do seek help. They go to their safe space or any support service available to them. Of course, they have help. They're getting it, but then there's enough work that I, as an individual, have to do on my own. So that's the last thing I wanted to ask you, that how can one reclaim their personhood. Yeah.
I'll let Achal take that
Okay.
first.
I think it's difficult to do. It's extremely important to recognize that it's not an easy task to reclaim yourself from any process. If you have a pattern of eating samosas, trying to reclaim yourself from eating samosas is difficult. But if you've experienced violence all your life, and if that's your lived experience and that's your narrative, I think the most important step is having a supportive relationship, professional relationship. And if you can't find that supportive professional relationship, having a relationship with yourself where you are not judging yourself and you're not blaming yourself. Then I think it's important to create opportunities to participate in life. One of the ways of outgrowing, you can never forget the pain. You can never, block it out. It will come back to you over and over again. One of the ways of outgrowing that pain is by recognizing that you will not let the past to coalesce with the present, and the present to then determine the future in a manner that it is harmful to you. What happened in the past, you have to draw a boundary there. And if it comes back to you, you have to label it as the past and remind yourself that you have the skills to be able to live your present and future. And if you don't have skills, that you will acquire those skills to be able to live your present and future in a manner that people are not violative of you. And for that, analyzing is one thing, but participating in life again is also important. I'm not saying move quickly into other relationships, move quickly into other, but don't stop exploring your strengths as a person because you've been violated once. Because sometimes one can get completely isolated.
That's true.
And that isolation in itself can stop the growth of the person. And lastly, remember, while your experience of violence is one experience that you have, one probably the single most important experience that you have. At the same time, you've had many other experiences as well, which have made you who you are, right? And there is much more to you than being the person who's faced the violence. So accept your anger, recognize your anger, counter it by taking steps to effectively seek justice as well. But there is a lot more to you than the anger. Remember that as well.
Right. Right. That's actually quite strong. Ma'am, if you'd like to add something to that.
I think just
And
one,
yeah.
one point to add to Achal is that, you need to move on with your life's journey by getting out of the desire for revenge. There's a difference between wanting justice and wanting revenge. Yes, you seek justice depending on the violation that you have had, whether it is an justice towards an economic reparation, or it's a justice towards, if it's, depending on, what the violation was. But if you dwell on it from a point of revenge, then I think it is very hard to get yourself out of that victimhood. You will be stuck in that. So if you want to move, when we are looking at this journey of personhood, as Achal said, it's important to identify for yourself as to who you were beyond that one identity that you had vis-a-vis the perpetrator.
Right.
Because your identity is much more than just being that sister or the wife or the partner or the mother or whatever to the violation. Your identity is also who you are by name and what you have achieved for yourself and done. So while you reclaim all of that, you also need to be able to negotiate a sense of justice which is not hinged out of a desire for just revenge, because that becomes a problematic thing. And I think society and sometimes many people tend to reinforce that sense. You need to get back, hit back, badla lena hai. That sense doesn't help you grow out of your victim.
It hampers your growth as well as a person, as an individual.
Understanding that, and it's not easy, because yes, when we are all angry, we want to hit back. It's a natural human instinct. If something does something, I'm like, yeah, usko sikhana hai, usko badla de, usko batana hai. Once you start, and you think that's how you're reclaiming yourself, but unfortunately not. You don't reclaim yourself by trying to respond to the negativity of the person who did it. You seek reparation and justice for that, but you reclaim yourself by focusing on your own positivity. And I think that's the important part.
Right. That's quite powerful. That's really strong. Thank you, both of you, for your time today. And of course, this conversation does not end here. We will keep going on, and we'll keep talking. Soon we'll be also speaking about the impact that domestic abuse can have on survivors as well as other family members. And we're talking about crisis intervention and other support services. Shakti Shalini has supported survivors of gender and sexual violence since 1987, and we do have helpline numbers and the services which we will be sharing regularly. So please look it up. And thank you both of you so much again. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Rapinda. Bye, Nandita. Take care.
Thanks, Achal. Bye. I'll catch up.